When the locksmith came that morning, I thought he had the wrong address. He was a polite young man, maybe in his late 20s, with a toolbox clanking against his knee and the smell of metal and oil on his hands. "Ma'am," he said, glancing down at his work order, "I'm here to change the locks." I remember laughing, the kind of nervous, polite laugh you give when someone's made a mistake. "There must be an error," I said, tightening the belt of my robe. "This is my house. No one's changing anything here." He looked confused, then turned the paper toward me. My name wasn't on it. The paper said, "Owner, Emily Foster." My daughter's name. That was the first time I felt something inside me crack. Not break, just crack like old porcelain under a sudden chill. My name is Margaret Foster, and for 50 years, this little house on Hawthorne Lane was everything I built my life around. The white shutters that needed painting every spring. The rose bushes my husband planted before he passed. The uneven tiles in the kitchen that tripped everyone except me, because I knew every creak, every flaw, every heartbeat of that place. After Harold died, it was just me and the house. We understood each other. My daughter, Emily, was always the responsible one, the organized one. When her younger brother Mark left for college and never really looked back, she became my shadow, or maybe I became hers. She'd come over every weekend, cook me soup, clean the cupboards, make gentle comments about getting older and making plans. First, it was comforting. But over time, I noticed she started talking about the house more than she talked about me. "Mom, this place needs real upkeep," she'd say, wiping her hands on a towel. "You shouldn't be climbing ladders or fixing leaks." "I'm not helpless, Emily," I tell her, smiling but firm. "I've lived here longer than you've been alive." She'd just sigh like I was a child insisting on tying her own shoes. Still, I trusted her. I always trusted her. When she suggested transferring the property title to her name for inheritance purposes, to avoid probate, she said, I didn't question it much. She was my only daughter, my flesh and blood. What reason would she have to betray me? The morning the locksmith came, I stood frozen in the doorway while the autumn wind crept down my collar. Emily arrived moments later, perfectly timed, almost as if she'd known he'd be there. She parked her silver SUV right in front of the gate, stepped out and smiled like nothing was wrong. "Mom, you're up early," she said. "Emily," I began, my voice trembling. "Why is this man changing my locks?" Her smile flickered, then steadied. "Mom, we talked about this. Remember? The house is under my name now. I'm just updating the security." I blinked. "Under your name? That was just for legal paperwork, not for you to take it." She sighed again, that same rehearsed patience she always used when she thought I was being unreasonable. "Mom, I'm only doing what's best for you. You're getting older and the doctor said." "The doctor said I'm fine," I snapped. "Don't twist his words." Her eyes hardened. "You forget things, Mom. Important things. You left the stove on last week. You nearly fell in the garden. I can't just sit by and watch you hurt yourself." It was then I realized what this was: not about safety, not about love. This was about control. I stepped back, clutching the doorframe. "Emily," I whispered, "what have you done?" She didn't answer. She just turned to the locksmith and said, "Go ahead." That metallic clicking sound, the lock being replaced, is something I'll never forget. It sounded like a door closing on my life. That night, I stayed at my neighbor's house, Mrs. Whitmore. A widow like me, soft-spoken but sharp as a needle. She made me tea and listened while I tried to make sense of everything. "She can't do that," I said, my voice shaking. "She can't just take my home." Mrs. Whitmore looked at me over her teacup. "Did you sign anything?" I hesitated. My mind replayed the memory. The day Emily brought over those papers, printed neatly in a folder. I'd signed them at the kitchen table while she smiled and said it was just to make sure things are easy when you're gone. I hadn't read them carefully. I trusted her. And now my name was gone from the deed. Over the next few days, things unraveled quickly. Emily brought over boxes of my things. Clothes, photo albums, the blanket Harold and I shared for years. She left them neatly stacked on Mrs. Whitmore's porch. "Mom," she said when I called her that evening, "I just think it's safer for you to stay somewhere with supervision. Maybe assisted living. They'll take good care of you there." I could barely breathe. "You're putting me in a home?" "I'm not putting you anywhere," she The first night after meeting with the lawyer, I didn't sleep. I lay in Mrs. Whitmore's guest room. The kind with floral wallpaper and a ticking clock that wouldn't let me forget time was moving on without me. Every few minutes, the image of that locksmith's hand turning the key replayed in my mind. That click. It echoed louder than thunder. I kept wondering, how long had Emily planned this? How many times had she smiled in my kitchen, knowing the paper she carried in her purse would one day make me a stranger in my own home? I tried not to think of her as cruel. She was still my daughter. The little girl who used to braid my hair while I read bedtime stories. The one who cried when her father passed. But there was something cold in the way she'd looked at me that morning, as if I were a project, not a person. The lawyer's name was Mr. Henderson, and he was the sort of man who spoke slowly, deliberately. Every word weighed before it left his mouth. His office smelled faintly of paper and coffee, and the walls were lined with framed diplomas and family photos. "I've seen this before," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "It's more common than you'd think. Children declaring their parents unfit to gain control of property or finances." The words made my stomach twist. "But she's my daughter," I said. "Why would she do this to me?" He looked at me kindly but didn't answer that question. Instead, he said, "If we want to fight this, we'll need to prove you're of sound mind. I'll arrange a cognitive evaluation, and I'll subpoena the transfer documents to see if there was coercion." "Coercion?" I repeated softly. He nodded. "If she misled you, or took advantage of your trust, that's coercion." I wanted to laugh. Misled me? She'd built her deception on years of love. On every cup of tea, every Sunday visit, every, "I'm just looking out for you, Mom." That's not a stranger's con. That's betrayal wearing a daughter's face. A week later, I sat in a clinic across from a psychologist who asked me to draw clocks and remember lists of words. I passed every test, though I felt ridiculous proving I was still sane. When it was over, she smiled and said gently, "You're sharper than most people half your age, Mrs. Foster." It should have comforted me, but it didn't. It just made the betrayal sting sharper. Because Emily knew that. She knew I was fine. Meanwhile, Emily wasn't answering my calls. When she finally did, her voice was curt, businesslike. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder?" I said. "You've taken everything from me." "I haven't taken anything. I'm protecting you." "By throwing me out of my home?" "You wouldn't understand," she said, and that tone, that dismissive tone, made something in me go cold. "Then help me understand," I said quietly. There was a pause, then she said, "You left me no choice. I couldn't keep watching you struggle. You've been living in the past, clinging to that house like it's all that's left of Dad. It's not healthy, Mom." "That house is my life's work," I whispered. "And it's falling apart. I've already listed it with an agent. Once it's sold, we can find you a nice community." "An agent?" I said, my heart pounding. "You're selling it?" She sighed. "Yes, Mom. I can't keep paying for the upkeep and taxes. It's time." Time. That word again. Always time. As if love had an expiration date. I went back to Mr. Henderson the next morning. He was already expecting me. "She's listed it?" he said, flipping through his notes. "Then we'll need an injunction to halt the sale until ownership is clarified." "How long will that take?" He rubbed his temple. "It depends. But we'll need witnesses. People who can vouch for your clarity of mind, for your ability to live independently. Neighbors, friends." "I have plenty," I said quickly. "Mrs. Whitmore, the girls from church, even my doctor. They'll tell you I'm fine." And they did. For days, I watched people I'd known for decades write letters, give statements, show up for me in ways I hadn't expected. It was humbling. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, no matter how much Emily wanted to isolate me. Still, I couldn't shake the ache in my chest every time I saw her name on legal documents. Emily Foster, sole owner. I used to be proud of that name. Now it looked like a knife. A few weeks later, a court hearing was scheduled. Emily didn't come. Her attorney did. A young woman in a gray suit who introduced herself politely and spoke with an air of cool efficiency. She presented papers, reports, and a sworn affidavit from Emily stating that I suffered from cognitive decline and emotional instability. She'd even included excerpts from my medical visits. Twisted, cherry-picked lines taken out of context. When my turn came, Mr. Henderson asked. I didn't plan what I was going to say to her. All I knew was that I couldn't stay silent anymore. When I parked in front of the house, Emily's car was already there. She was standing on the porch with a man in a navy blazer, the kind of realtor who smiles too much and doesn't really look at you. He was gesturing toward the front door, talking about charming bones and vintage character. Emily nodded absently, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. When she saw me, her face froze. "Mom," she said, her voice low but edged. "What are you doing here?" "I came home," I said simply. The realtor looked between us, awkward. "Oh, I didn't realize." "You can go," she told him. "We'll reschedule." He gave me a polite nod, muttered something about being in touch, and hurried to his car. We stood there in silence, the autumn wind tugging at our coats. The house loomed behind her, my house, but the windows felt strange now, like eyes that didn't recognize me. "I told you not to come here," she said quietly. "And I told you this is my home." "Legally it's not," she said, her voice tightening. "Mom, please don't do this here." I took a step closer. "You think paperwork makes it yours? That because you changed a few signatures it stops being mine?" She looked away. "You don't understand what it's like, watching you live alone, struggling." "I wasn't struggling," I snapped. "You made it seem that way. You exaggerated everything just to justify what you wanted." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Emily never cried easily. She was always the practical one. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said finally. "But someone had to take responsibility. You were living in a museum, Mom. You've been stuck since Dad died." My throat tightened. "And stealing my home was your way of helping?" Her voice broke then, just a little. "I didn't steal it. I saved it. You have no idea how close you were to losing everything, the taxes, the roof repairs, the plumbing. I've been covering half the costs for years. You think I can just keep doing that?" "So this was about money," I said softly. "No, it was about sanity. About finally letting go." I stared at her, really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the way her hands shook slightly when she tried to keep them steady. There it was, guilt buried under all that control. "Emily," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "if you needed help, you could have asked. If you were overwhelmed, we could have figured something out. But you lied. You called me unfit. You took away my dignity." Her lips trembled. "I didn't mean for it to get that far." "The lawyer said." "The lawyer didn't forge my consent. You did." She looked down at the porch steps, eyes glassy. "I thought you'd forgive me. Eventually. Forgiveness doesn't erase what's been done." The silence between us stretched, filled only by the soft rustle of leaves. For a moment I almost reached out to touch her, to comfort her even after everything, but I stopped myself. Some lessons can't be softened. Later that night, Mr. Henderson called. The judge had granted a temporary injunction. The sale was paused. It wasn't over, but it meant the house couldn't be touched until the case was resolved. When I hung up, I sat by Mrs. Whitmore's window, watching the streetlights flicker on. Relief should have felt like joy, but it didn't. It just felt heavy, because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about understanding how love could twist itself into something that looks so much like protection, but hurt like betrayal. In the weeks that followed, word spread through the neighborhood. People whispered in the grocery store, at church, even at the post office. Some pitied me. Others pitied Emily. Few could believe it. The dutiful daughter turning on her mother. Emily stopped coming around. When I did see her, usually outside the courthouse, she looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally, like the weight of her choices was catching up to her. At one hearing, her lawyer presented a thick folder of evidence. Photos of the house's disrepair, receipts for maintenance, even one of me napping in the garden. "She's clearly declining," her attorney said. "These are the actions of someone who can't care for themselves." I remember the judge glancing at me, calm, composed, sitting upright with my notes neatly arranged. And then back at the photo of me napping, my hat tilted, my hands folded over my lap. "Mrs. Foster," he asked, "were you asleep in this picture?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "It was a warm day." The courtroom chuckled softly, even the judge. Sometimes the truth doesn't need a fight. It just needs to stand there quietly and be itself. When the hearing adjourned, Emily didn't meet my eyes. She left quickly, her shoulders TI. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in months, I didn't feel that heavy pit of dread in my chest. The sky outside was pale and quiet, the kind of stillness that comes before a new day begins to believe in itself. Emily's call the night before still echoed in my mind. I had wanted to believe her truly, but I'd learned by then that belief wasn't the same as trust. Mr. Henderson confirmed later that morning that Emily had indeed contacted him. She reached out, he said, asking about the process for reversing the transfer. It'll take time, but it's a good sign. I thanked him, then sat for a long while just staring at my hands, the same hands that had signed those papers, the same hands that had built and nurtured everything inside that house. They'd once trusted too easily, but they still had strength left in them. When Emily and I met again, it wasn't in court. It was at the house. She called me earlier that week, asking if I wanted to come by and talk, really talk. I agreed, though part of me feared what I'd find. When I walked through that gate, the familiar creak of the hinge made my throat tighten. It was all still there, the rose bushes, the worn steps, the uneven stones. The air smelled of wet earth and old paint, like memory itself. Emily opened the door before I could knock. She looked smaller. Not in body but in spirit, as if she'd been carrying too much for too long. "Come in," she said softly. The house looked the same, but it felt different. The walls seemed to hum with all that had passed between us. My eyes landed on the table where I'd signed those papers, the same table Harold had built by hand. I brushed my fingers over its surface. "Do you remember when your father spilled varnish on this?" I asked. Emily smiled faintly. "You made him sleep on the couch for a week." We both laughed then. A small, uncertain sound that trembled between guilt and comfort. We sat in the kitchen. She poured coffee for both of us the way she always used to, but this time her hands shook slightly. "I've been thinking," she began, staring into her cup, "about everything. About what I did." I waited. "I thought I was protecting you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But really, I was protecting myself. I was scared, Mom. Scared of losing you the way I lost Dad. Scared that one day I'd get a call saying you'd fallen or forgotten to turn something off, or," her voice cracked, "or that you'd be gone, and I wouldn't have done enough." I felt something deep in my chest shift. I had been so focused on what she'd taken that I hadn't seen what had driven her to do it, fear. The same fear that had once lived in me after Harold died, when I called her 3 times a day just to make sure she was eating. "I know now," she went on, "that I crossed a line. I thought if I controlled things I could control time. But I can't. And I'm so sorry, Mom. I really am." I reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was cold. "Emily," I said quietly, "love isn't about control. It's about trust. You can't protect someone by breaking them." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I know. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late." A few weeks later, the paperwork was filed. The title was restored, my name back where it belonged. Mr. Henderson called it a victory. Called it mercy. But the real healing didn't come from the courthouse. Came slowly in the days that followed. Emily began visiting again, not to check on me, but to be with me. We cooked together. We replanted the rose bushes that had withered while I was gone. Sometimes she'd pause in the middle of a chore and say softly, "I still can't believe I did that to you." And each time I'd tell her the same thing. "You were lost, not cruel. There's a difference." Because that's the truth I'd come to understand, that sometimes the people who hurt us most aren't monsters. They're just afraid. They confuse love with possession, protection with control. And if we're strong enough to forgive, we can teach them what love really looks like. The community eventually moved on from the gossip. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. One afternoon, months later, Emily and I stood in the garden together. The sun was warm, and bees hovered lazily over the blossoms. She was holding a watering can, and I was trimming the hedges. A scene so ordinary it almost made me laugh. "You know," she said after a while, "I've been thinking of moving closer. Maybe just down the street. So I can visit more often, but not hover." I smiled. "That sounds perfect." Then she looked at me, her eyes glistening. "Do you still hate me, Mom?" I shook my head. "I never hated you. I was angry, yes. Hurt. But hate? No. That would mean giving up on you. And sometimes, when the nights grow quiet and the house settles into its familiar rhythm, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of wind through the cracks in the window frame, I find myself thinking back to that morning with the locksmith. Still feels like a dream in a way. A cruel one. How something so solid, a home, a relationship, a lifetime of trust, can vanish with a few strokes of a pen. But then I remember what came after. The long nights, the hard conversations, the fragile rebuilding of something that had almost been lost forever. And I realize, maybe that morning wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning of a truth I hadn't wanted to face. See, when you raise a child, you pour everything you have into them. Your time, your love, your laughter. You teach them how to walk, how to speak, how to tell right from wrong. But no one tells you that one day they'll start to see you through the same lens, wondering if you can still stand, still decide, still lead. It's a strange reversal, the child becoming the caretaker, the parent becoming the one to be managed. And if you're not careful, love turns into fear. Fear turns into control. And control turns love into something that looks a lot like betrayal. That's what happened to Emily. She loved me. I know that now. But her love was tangled up with fear, fear of loss, fear of time, fear of seeing me fade away. And in trying to hold on to me, she almost erased me entirely. Forgiving her wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to pick up the phone and shout. How could you? But shouting doesn't mend anything. It just adds more cracks to the silence. So I chose to forgive quietly, one day at a time. When she called just to say good night, I answered. When she showed up with groceries, I let her in. When she apologized for the 100th time, I listened, not because I needed the words, but because she needed to say them. And with every small moment of grace, we began to heal. One Sunday after church, I caught her watching me from across the yard while I was pruning the roses. She smiled, that same crooked smile she had as a child when she'd done something wrong but wanted to make it right. I smiled back. And in that small exchange I realized, she didn't just give me my house back. She gave me back the chance to love her without bitterness. That's what forgiveness does. It doesn't erase the past. It reclaims the present. I don't know what the future holds. I'm older now, and there will come a day when I do have to leave this house for good, one way or another. But when that day comes, it won't be because someone took the choice from me. It'll be because I made peace with the time I was given here, and the people I shared it with. Until then, I'll keep tending my roses. I'll keep baking pies on Sundays. I'll keep opening my door to my daughter when she visits, and I'll keep reminding her that love, real love, doesn't need permission slips or property deeds. Just needs honesty and heart. When I look at this old house now, I see more than walls. I see lessons carved into every corner about trust, pride, aging, and forgiveness. Because a home, no matter how many times it's lost or reclaimed, is really just a reflection of the people who live in it. And this home, my home, will always be built on something stronger than paper. It's built on love. So tell me, my dear, if someone you love took everything from you, not out of greed but out of fear, could you find it in your heart to forgive them? Would you fight for the house? Or would you fight for the heart that made it a home? Tell me in the comments. I'll be waiting to hear your story.